A foster child found a lost locket, never imagining it held the key to finding her true family. 13-year-old Ellie Morgan stared at the small heart-shaped pendant resting in her palm, its golden surface catching the thin afternoon light filtering through the dusty window of her latest bedroom. 7 homes in 5 years had taught her not to get attached to places or people. This room, like all the others, was temporary. A stopping place, nothing more. She traced the delicate pattern etched into the metal with her fingertip, feeling the slight ridges beneath her skin. Someone had loved this once. Someone had worn it close to their heart. Now it sat cold and abandoned in her hand, found buried in the soil of Mrs. Winter's neglected garden when Ellie had been assigned to clear the weeds as punishment for coming home late from school. "Ellie, dinner's ready!" Mrs. Winter's voice cut through her thoughts, sharp as the winter air that seeped through the poorly insulated walls. Ellie quickly slipped the locket into her jeans pocket. It wasn't stealing if no one claimed it, she reasoned. And besides, something about it felt important. She'd been collecting small treasures since she was 7, the age when her mother had disappeared from her life, leaving nothing but a fading memory of lavender perfume and soft bedtime stories. The kitchen was warm but not welcoming. The 3 other foster children, 2 boys and a girl, all younger than Ellie, were already seated at the table, eyes down, shoulders hunched. Mrs. Winters wasn't cruel, just distant. The kind of guardian who provided food, shelter, and not much else. The basic necessities without the one thing Ellie craved most: belonging. "Sorry I'm late," Ellie murmured, sliding into her chair. Mrs. Winters gave a tight nod, serving meatloaf that had spent too long in the oven. "The social worker's coming tomorrow. Your 6-month review." Ellie's stomach tightened. 6 months already. The longest she'd stayed anywhere since the Petersons 2 years ago. Reviews meant questions, evaluations, and sometimes, most times, changes. New homes, new faces, starting over. That night, after the younger children had fallen asleep, Ellie sat cross-legged on her bed and examined the locket under the beam of her flashlight. It was tarnished but beautiful, with an intricate filigree pattern surrounding what appeared to be a small letter A. On the front, her fingers found a tiny clasp on the side, and with gentle pressure, the locket opened. Inside was a faded photograph, so small she had to squint to make out the details. A woman with dark hair like Ellie's own, smiling at the camera, holding what looked like a baby wrapped in a pale blanket. On the opposite side of the locket was an inscription, the letters tiny but still legible. "To Anne, with all my love. Always D." Something cold and electric slid down Ellie's spine. Her mother's name had been Anne. It couldn't be. It was impossible. A coincidence. Yet her fingers trembled as she closed the locket and pressed it against her chest, feeling her heartbeat through the metal. Coincidence or not, this small, golden heart was now the closest thing to a family heirloom she possessed. Sleep came fitfully that night, filled with dreams of a dark-haired woman calling her name from somewhere she couldn't reach. The next morning dawned gray and sullen, a perfect match for Ellie's mood as she prepared for her meeting with Ms. Patel, the social worker who had overseen her case for the past 3 years. Ellie liked Ms. Patel more than most adults in the system. She didn't make empty promises or speak in the overly cheerful tones that some used, as if volume and enthusiasm could compensate for the fundamental brokenness of being a child without parents. The locket remained in her pocket, a small weight against her thigh. She'd taken to rubbing it with her thumb when anxiety threatened to overwhelm her, like now, sitting on the stiff couch in Mrs. Winters' seldom-used living room, waiting. The doorbell chimed at exactly 10 o'clock. Ms. Patel was nothing if not punctual. "Hello, Ellie." The social worker's smile was genuine as she sat down, placing her ever-present leather portfolio on the coffee table between them. "How have you been?" "Fine," Ellie answered automatically. The universal response of foster kids everywhere. Ms. Patel's dark eyes studied her face. "Just fine," Ellie shrugged. "School's okay. Got an A on my history project." "That's wonderful." "Mrs. Winters mentioned you've been helping in the garden." "Had to," Ellie corrected before she could stop herself. "I was late coming home?" "Something in Ms. Patel's expression shifted. "I see. And how are you getting along with the other children?" "With Mrs. Winters?" The standard questions, the ones Ellie had answered dozens of times before. She gave the standard answers. Everything was fine, no problems. Yes, she had enough to eat. Yes, she felt safe. The locket pressed against her leg seemed to grow heavier with each lie of omission. "Is there anything you'd like to talk about, Ellie? Anything at all?" The question hung in the air between them. Ellie's fingers found the locket in her pocket, tracing its shape. Before she could reconsider, she pulled it out. "I found this in the garden, Ms." Patel leaned forward, her expression curious. "May I see it?" Ellie hesitated before placing it in the woman's outstretched palm, feeling oddly vulnerable, as if she were handing over a piece of herself. "It's beautiful, Ms." Patel said softly, examining the filigree work. "Have you shown it to Mrs. Winters?" "It might belong to her. It was buried," Ellie said quickly, "in the back corner where nobody ever goes. It's been there a long time, Ms." Patel nodded, turning the locket over in her hands. "Have you opened it?" Ellie swallowed. "Yes. And there's a picture, a woman and a baby, and an inscription to someone named Anne." Something flickered across Ms. Patel's face, so brief Ellie might have imagined it. "Anne," she repeated, her voice strangely quiet. "May I?" When Ellie nodded, Ms. Patel carefully opened the locket. The change in her expression was unmistakable this time, a widening of the eyes, a slight parting of the lips. She stared at the tiny photograph for a long moment before snapping the locket closed with trembling fingers. "Ellie," she said slowly, "where exactly did you find this?" "Under the big oak tree near the back fence." "Why? What's wrong, Ms.?" Patel hesitated, then handed the locket back to Ellie. "Nothing's wrong. It's just unusual. Listen, would you mind if I took a picture of this? Of the locket and what's inside?" Confusion and something like hope twisted in Ellie's chest. "Why? It might be important, Ms." Patel's voice was carefully controlled. "I can't explain right now, but I promise I'll tell you if I learn anything. Is that okay?" Ellie nodded slowly, watching as Ms. Patel used her phone to photograph the locket from several angles, including the picture and inscription inside. The social worker's hands weren't quite steady. "Thank you, Ellie. Now let's finish our review, shall we?" The rest of the meeting passed in a blur. Ellie's mind kept circling back to Ms. Patel's reaction. The way her professional demeanor had cracked, just for a moment. Something about the locket had affected her. Something she wasn't saying. After Ms. Patel left, promising to check in again soon, sooner than the usual schedule would dictate, Ellie retreated to her room. She sat on the bed, the locket open in her hands, staring at the tiny face of the woman who might or might not be her mother. The logical part of her brain warned against hope. Coincidences happened. The world was full of women named Anne who had children. The locket could have belonged to anyone. But another part of her, the part that had never stopped looking for her mother's face in crowds, whispered that some things were meant to be found. 3 days passed with no word from Ms. Patel. Ellie carried the locket everywhere, even to school, where she kept it safely zipped in an inner pocket of her backpack. She'd started having dreams about the woman in the photograph, dreams where she called Ellie by name, held out her arms, waited for Ellie to come to her. On the 4th day, as Ellie walked home from school, a car pulled up beside her. The passenger window rolled down to reveal Ms. Patel's face. "Ellie, do you have a minute to talk?" The serious tone sent a ripple of unease through Ellie's body. She nodded, clutching her backpack strap tighter. "Get in, please. I need to show you something." Ellie hesitated only briefly before sliding into the passenger seat. Ms. Patel was safe, known. If there was news about the locket, good or bad, she wanted to hear it. "I've been doing some research, Ms." Patel said as she pulled away from the curb. "About the locket, and ... about your mother." Ellie's heart stuttered. "What did you find?" "I think it's better if I show you. We're going to meet someone." The drive took them across town to a part of the city Ellie had never visited, a neighborhood of small, well-kept houses with flowering shrubs and neatly trimmed lawns. Ms. Patel parked in front of a blue ranch-style home with white shutters and a wheelchair ramp leading to the front door. "Who lives here?" Ellie asked, her voice smaller than she intended. "His name is Daniel Mercer. He's 72 years old, and he might be able to tell us about your locket." Ellie's fingers found the familiar shape in her pocket. "How did you find him?" "The inscription in the locket. To Anne with all my love. Always D. I cross-referenced it with what little we know about your mother. Anne Morgan disappeared when you were 7, but before that she lived in this area. Daniel Mercer has lived here for 40 years. And 30 years ago he reported a missing person, his fiancée, Anne Collins. That doesn't mean—" "No, it doesn't," Ms. Patel agreed gently. "But there's more." Ann Collins was reported missing on October 12, 1993. She was never found. 2 weeks later, a woman calling herself Ann Morgan applied for emergency housing assistance in a town 50 miles from here. She had a 5-month-old baby girl with her. The world seemed to tilt beneath Ellie. Me? The timing fits. And now this locket with the initial A and the inscription from D. I think we need to talk to Mr. Mercer. But Ellie, I need you to understand, this might lead nowhere. Or it might be difficult news. Are you prepared for that? Was anyone ever prepared for the truth? Ellie doubted it, but she nodded anyway. The man who answered the door leaned heavily on a cane. His body was frail, but his eyes, bright blue and keen, examined Ellie with startling intensity. Mr. Mercer, Ms. Patel began, "Thank you for agreeing to meet with us. This is Ellie Morgan." Something passed across the old man's face, recognition, shock, or perhaps just the painful spasm of old memories. He gripped his cane tighter. "You look like her," he said, his voice rough with age and emotion. "Come in, please." The inside of the house was neat but lived in, with books stacked on most surfaces and framed photographs covering the walls. Ellie's eyes were drawn immediately to a large portrait hanging above the fireplace, a young woman with dark hair and a bright smile, her head tilted slightly as if sharing a private joke with the photographer. The same woman from the locket. "That's Ann," Daniel Mercer said, following her gaze. "Ann Collins, the love of my life." Ellie couldn't breathe. The woman in the photograph had her eyes, her smile. "Mr. Mercer, Ms. Patel said softly, Ellie has something to show you." With trembling fingers, Ellie withdrew the locket from her pocket. The old man's reaction was immediate, a sharp intake of breath, a hand reaching out as if to touch a ghost. "Where did you get that?" he whispered. "I found it, in the garden of my foster home. May I?" Ellie placed the locket in his weathered palm. Daniel Mercer held it as if it were made of spun glass, turning it over, running his thumb across the filigree pattern. "I gave this to Ann on her 25th birthday," he said, his voice thick with memory. 6 months before she disappeared. She was pregnant then. So happy. We were going to be married after the baby came. He looked up at Ellie, his eyes swimming with tears. "She never told me why she left. Just vanished one day while I was at work. I searched for years. Did you know she had the baby, Ms.?" Patel asked gently. Daniel nodded. "A neighbor saw her about a week before she disappeared. Said Ann had told her it was a girl." His gaze returned to Ellie's face, searching. "You would be the right age." The room seemed to shrink around them, the air growing thick with unspoken questions. Ellie found her voice small but steady. "My mother's name was Ann Morgan. She left when I was 7. I don't remember much about her. Morgan was her mother's maiden name," Daniel said quietly. "She always said she'd use it if she ever wanted to disappear." A sad smile touched his lips. "I thought she was joking." "Ms. Patel cleared her throat. "Mr. Mercer, I know this is a lot to process, but would you be willing to take a DNA test? It could confirm whether Ellie is my daughter." He finished the sentence, the words hanging in the air like something precious and fragile. "Yes, of course." The next 2 weeks passed in a haze of paperwork, tests, and waiting. Ellie continued her life at Mrs. Winter's house, going to school, doing homework, helping with chores, all while carrying the impossible hope that had taken root in her heart. The locket remained her talisman, the tangible link to a past she was only beginning to discover. Daniel Mercer called every evening, their conversations awkward at first, then gradually warming as they found common ground. He loved history, so did she. He played chess. She'd learned in her 3rd foster home. He hated peas. Ellie couldn't stand them either. "Your mother used to hide them in her napkin when her parents weren't looking," he told her, chuckling. "Drove her mother crazy." These small details, the ordinary human traits that connected her to Ann Collins, were like water to parched soil. Ellie drank them in, building a picture of the woman who had given her life, who had loved her enough to keep her, but not enough to stay. When Ms. Patel finally called with the test results, Ellie was helping Mrs. Winters prepare dinner. The younger children were setting the table, bickering over who got the blue plate. "It's positive, Ellie," Ms. Patel said, her professional tone barely containing her excitement. 99.9% probability. "Daniel Mercer is your biological father." The wooden spoon Ellie had been using to stir pasta sauce clattered to the floor. Mrs. Winters turned, eyebrows raised in question. "I have a father," Ellie whispered into the phone. "A real father." The next phase happened with dizzying speed. More meetings, more paperwork? A judge who smiled kindly as she reviewed the case. Daniel Mercer, leaning on his cane in the courtroom, answering questions about his health, his home, his ability to care for a 13-year-old girl. The court-appointed guardian who inspected his house and reported that while Mr. Mercer would need some assistance, the home was suitable and his dedication unquestionable. And finally, on a clear spring morning 6 weeks after finding the locket, Ellie stood in Mrs. Winter's driveway with her few possessions packed in 2 suitcases. "Take care of yourself," Mrs. Winter said, awkwardly patting Ellie's shoulder. It was the most affection she'd ever shown. The other children watched from the porch, their expressions a mixture of envy and genuine happiness for her. Ellie had given her collection of small treasures to the youngest, a solemn 6-year-old named Maya. Everything except the locket, which hung around her neck now, close to her heart where it belonged. Daniel Mercer's blue house looked different this time, not a stranger's home but a place where she would belong. Ms. Patel helped carry her suitcases up the ramp as Daniel held the door open, his smile tremulous but warm. "Welcome home, Ellie," he said. Home. Such a simple word. Such an impossible concept for a girl who had lived in 8 different houses since she was 7 years old. Her new bedroom had been freshly painted a soft green, her favorite color. She'd mentioned it during one of their evening calls. There were bookshelves filled with volumes both old and new, a desk by the window overlooking a garden that burst with spring flowers, and a quilted bedspread that Daniel explained had been made by his mother, Ellie's grandmother. "I know it's not much," he said, watching her anxiously. "We can change anything you don't like." Ellie turned in a slow circle, taking it all in. "It's perfect," she whispered. That evening, after Ms. Patel had left with promises to check in regularly, Ellie and Daniel sat on the back porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. A comfortable silence had settled between them, the kind that felt like the beginning of something rather than an awkward gap. "There's something I need to ask," Ellie said finally. "About my mother. Why did she leave you? Why did she leave me when I was 7? Where is she now?" Daniel's hands tightened on the arms of his chair. He'd known these questions would come, had been preparing for them since the day Ellie showed him the locket. "Your mother was complicated," he began slowly. "Brilliant and loving but troubled. She had episodes of deep depression, times when she believed everyone would be better off without her. When she discovered she was pregnant with you, she was terrified of being a mother, afraid she'd fail you somehow." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "I thought I'd convinced her we would face it together, but then she disappeared. When I finally tracked her down, almost a year later, she was living as Anne Morgan. She had you and she seemed better, stable. She asked me to let her be, to give her time to build a life for you both. I loved her enough to respect her wishes, though it broke my heart. You knew where we were?" Ellie couldn't keep the accusation from her voice. "For a while, I sent money when I could, but Anne moved frequently and eventually I lost track. I hired investigators over the years, but..." He shook his head. "The last confirmed sighting was when you were about 5. After that, nothing. Until she left me too," Ellie said softly. Daniel nodded, his expression pained. "I've often wondered if her depression returned. If she felt herself slipping and was afraid of hurting you somehow. By staying? By letting you see her fall apart. Your mother's greatest fear was causing pain to those she loved." Ellie fingered the locket at her throat. "So she might still be out there somewhere?" "It's possible. I've never stopped looking." The truth settled over Ellie like a blanket, not entirely comfortable but necessary. Her mother hadn't abandoned her out of callousness, but out of a twisted form of love, a broken mind's version of protection. "I want to find her," Ellie said, the words surprising her even as they left her mouth. "Not to live with her or anything, just to know, to understand." Daniel reached across the space between them, offering his hand. After a moment's hesitation, Ellie took it. "Then we'll look together," he promised. Summer bloomed around the blue house, bringing with it a routine that felt increasingly natural. Daniel taught Ellie to play the piano on the old upright in the living room, his arthritic fingers demonstrating scales and simple melodies. Ellie helped in the garden, discovering a talent for coaxing reluctant plants into bloom. They took drives to the lake on weekends, Daniel sharing stories of his youth while Ellie waded in the shallows, searching for interesting stones to add to her new collection. The search for Anne Morgan continued in the background of their developing relationship. Daniel had hired a new investigator, a younger man with technological skills his predecessors had lacked. Ellie provided what few memories she had, the scent of lavender, A song her mother used to sing, the name of a stuffed rabbit she'd left behind in their last apartment. As summer waned into fall, Ellie started at a new school. The transition was easier than previous ones had been. Having a permanent address, a home to return to, made all the difference. She joined the chess club, made tentative friendships, brought home report cards that Daniel proudly displayed on the refrigerator. On a crisp October evening, as golden leaves spiraled down from the maple trees lining their street, the investigator called. "We found something," he told Daniel. A woman matching Anne's description was admitted to a hospital in Oregon 3 years ago. The name she gave was different, Elizabeth Ford, but the fingerprints are a match to the ones we have on file from Anne Collins' old teaching license. Ellie, listening on the extension, felt her heart constrict. Is she still there? Is she okay? A pause. She was treated for pneumonia and released after 2 weeks. But here's where it gets interesting. She listed an emergency contact. A sister named Caroline Ford with an address in Portland. "My mother doesn't have a sister," Daniel said. "No, but the address is real. And there's a Caroline Ford living there, has been for the past 5 years. The next day, Daniel and Ellie sat at the kitchen table, looking at the information the investigator had sent. A photograph taken from hospital security footage showed a woman with her head down, dark hair streaked with gray obscuring her face. The Oregon address was for an apartment complex near a community college. "What do we do now?" Ellie asked, her voice small. Daniel looked at her, his blue eyes serious. "That's up to you, sweetheart. We could send a letter. We could call, or we could go there," Ellie finished. The possibility hung in the air between them, both thrilling and terrifying. "It would mean missing some school," Daniel cautioned. "And it might be for nothing. She might have moved on. Or she might be there," Ellie countered. "Waiting, not knowing how to find us." That night, Ellie lay awake, the locket clutched in her hand. The tiny photograph inside, of Anne Collins holding baby Ellie, seemed to pulse with significance. What would her mother look like now? Would she be happy to see them? Angry? Afraid? Would she even remember the daughter she'd left behind? In the morning, Ellie's decision was made. They would go to Oregon, following this fragile thread of hope. Daniel made the arrangements: plane tickets, a rental car, a hotel room in Portland. Ms. Patel, when informed of their plans, offered cautious support and practical advice about managing expectations. 3 days later, they stood outside a modest apartment building in a quiet Portland neighborhood. Autumn had touched Oregon, too. The streets were damp with recent rain, the air sharp with the scent of wet leaves and wood smoke. "Are you ready?" Daniel asked, his hand warm on Ellie's shoulder. "No," she wanted to say. "I'll never be ready for this." But she nodded anyway, clutching the locket that had brought them to this moment. The building had no security entrance. They climbed to the second floor, following the numbers until they reached 2C. Daniel's knock seemed unnaturally loud in the quiet hallway. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then came the sound of movement inside, light footsteps approaching. The door opened to reveal a woman in her early 60s, her silver-streaked dark hair pulled back in a neat bun, her eyes, Ellie's eyes, widening in shock as she took in the visitors on her threshold. "Daniel?" The name was barely a whisper. "Hello, Anne," he said softly. The woman swayed slightly, one hand gripping the doorframe for support. Her gaze moved from Daniel to Ellie, her expression a complex mixture of fear, joy, and something like pain. "Ellie?" The name caught in her throat. "Is that really you?" Ellie couldn't speak. The woman before her was at once a stranger and achingly familiar, the shape of her face, the set of her shoulders, the way her left eyebrow arched in question, all echoes of what Ellie saw in the mirror each day. "We found the locket," Daniel said when the silence stretched too long. "Ellie found it, actually, in her foster home's garden." Anne's hand went to her throat, where the locket had once rested. "I lost it years ago. I thought—" She shook her head, seeming to collect herself. "Please come in. If you want to." The apartment was small but comfortable, filled with books and plants. Framed botanical prints hung on the walls, and a desk by the window held what looked like student papers waiting to be graded. "I teach botany at the community college," Anne explained, following Ellie's gaze. "Part-time." "It's enough." They sat awkwardly in the living room, the weight of unasked questions filling the space between them. Anne made tea that no one drank, her hands trembling as she set down the cups. "I don't know where to begin," she finally said, "except to say I'm sorry. So deeply sorry." "Why did you leave?" The question burst from Ellie, sharper than she'd intended. "Why didn't you come back?" Anne's eyes filled with tears. I wanted to. Every day I wanted to. But I was afraid. Of what? Of hurting you more than I already had. Anne looked down at her clasped hands. When I left your father, I was ill. Not physically, mentally. Depression that wouldn't lift, no matter what I tried. When I found out I was pregnant with you, I panicked. I convinced myself you'd be better off without me. That Daniel would find someone whole to help raise you. But you kept me, Ellie said. A sad smile touched Anne's lips. I couldn't let you go. The moment I held you, I knew I'd do anything to protect you. For a while, it worked. The depression lifted. We were happy. Until you left me too. Anne flinched as if struck. It came back. Worse than before. I started having thoughts. Terrible thoughts about hurting myself. I was afraid you'd find me. That you'd be the one. She couldn't finish. I checked myself into a hospital. Asked them to contact child services. I thought it would be temporary just until I got better. But the treatment was slow, and by the time I was stable enough to function, they told me you were settled in a good foster home. That disrupting your life again might do more harm than good. So you just gave up? Ellie couldn't keep the bitterness from her voice. No. I checked on you. Through the social services office. They said you were doing well. I convinced myself you were better off without my instability in your life. Anne wiped away tears with a trembling hand. It was the hardest thing I've ever done, walking away from you. I've regretted it every day since. Daniel, who had been silent until now, leaned forward. Why didn't you contact me, Anne? I would have helped. We could have raised her together. Gotten you the support you needed. Pride, Anne whispered. Shame. Fear that you'd take her from me completely. By the time I realized my mistake, it seemed too late to undo the damage. The room fell silent again, each of them lost in private thoughts. Ellie fingered the locket at her throat, this small golden heart that had somehow bridged the gulf of years and mistakes, bringing 3 broken people back to each other. I found this in my foster mother's garden, she said finally. What are the odds of that? It's like it was waiting for me. Anne looked up, her expression softening. Mrs. Winters was my counselor years ago. When I was first diagnosed, I visited her home once for a group therapy session. I must have lost the locket there. Mrs. Winters was your counselor? Ellie repeated, incredulous. Did she know who I was when they placed me with her? I don't think so. It was 15 years ago, and I used a different name with her. Just one of those strange coincidences that life sometimes gives us. Anne hesitated, then added softly, or perhaps something more than coincidence. The 3 of them talked for hours, filling in the missing pieces of their shared history. Anne had spent years battling her depression, finding stability through medication, therapy, and the structure of teaching. She'd never married, never had other children. Daniel told her about his life after she left, his career as an engineer, his retirement, the heart attack 5 years ago that had left him dependent on a cane. As afternoon faded into evening, the conversation shifted from past to present, and tentatively to future. What would happen now? Could the damage of years apart ever be repaired? I'd like to know you, Ellie said finally, her voice steady despite the emotions churning inside her. Both of you. Together or separately. I don't expect everything to be perfect. I just want the chance to have a family. My family. Daniel reached for her hand. After a moment's hesitation, Anne did the same, her cool fingers completing the circle. I'd like that too, Anne said. More than anything. Outside the apartment windows, darkness had fallen. Lights twinkled in the city below, each one representing a home, a family, a collection of stories both finished and still being written. Ellie thought about the locket that had led her here, how something so small could change the course of 3 lives. She thought about the foster homes she'd lived in, the temporary families who had shaped her in ways both good and difficult. She thought about the incredible chain of events that had brought her to this moment, sitting between the 2 people who had given her life. There would be challenges ahead. Anne's illness wouldn't magically disappear. Daniel's health would require careful monitoring. Their new, fragile family bond would need nurturing, patience, and time to grow strong. But for now, in this quiet apartment with rain tapping gently against the windows, Ellie felt something she hadn't experienced in years, the certainty of belonging. Later, as they prepared to leave, to return to their hotel and make plans for the days ahead, Anne took Ellie's hands in hers. I never stopped loving you, she said, her voice breaking on the words. Not for a single day. Ellie looked into her mother's eyes, her own eyes, and saw the truth there. I know, she said. I think I always knew. The locket hung between them, catching the light, a small golden heart that had finally found its way home. In the months that followed, they built something new from the fragments of what had been lost. Anne moved to a small apartment near Daniel's house, close enough for daily visits but maintaining the independence she needed. Ellie divided her time between both homes, gathering stories, creating new memories, learning the complicated dance of loving people who were both strangers and the most familiar souls in her world. On her 14th birthday, they sat together in Daniel's garden, the three of them plus Ms. Patel, who had become a friend as well as a social worker. The spring air was sweet with the scent of newly bloomed flowers, and sunshine warmed their faces as they shared cake and laughter. "I have something for you," Anne said, handing Ellie a small wrapped package. Inside was a journal bound in soft leather, the cover embossed with a pattern that matched the filigree on the locket. "For your stories," Anne explained. "All the ones still waiting to be told." Ellie ran her fingers over the journal, thinking of all that had happened since that autumn day when she'd unearthed a small golden heart from Mrs. Winter's garden. How a lost locket had led her to a found family. How sometimes the most precious things are buried just below the surface, waiting to be discovered. Later, alone in her room, her permanent room in her permanent home, she opened the journal to its first blank page. The locket lay open beside her, the tiny photograph a reminder of where she'd come from and the love that had survived despite everything. Ellie picked up her pen and began to write. A foster child found a lost locket, never imagining it held the key to finding her true family.